Well, let's talk about this with the journalist and author Ross Clark, who joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Ross.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, often we interview, and I say, you talk about your book, Not Zero, and I always love your subtitles, how an irrational target will impoverish you, help China, and won't even save the planet. And my goodness me, you've outlined and made those arguments fantastically. You've got a brand new book out this week, Far From Utopia, How Europe is Failing and Britain Could Do Better. Again, I mean, writing this, just when we've got Donald Trump arriving in the White House, planning to do, literally the opposite policies of most of Britain and Europe is very telling. But what is interesting is, although he's talking about getting rid of a lot of these policies and drill, baby, drill, the reality is, even under Biden, they talked a lot about a lot of the net zero stuff, and they ploughed a load of money into net zero policies. But actually, they were drilling away and fracking away already, weren't they?
They were. The US has had an unashamed policy of achieving national energy security through fracking and exploitation of oil reserves for the past 20 years. Whoever's been in the White House, whether it's been George W. Bush, Obama, Trump in his first manifestation, or Biden, they all followed this policy, and it has enriched America hugely. Over the past 2 decades, America's been growing roughly about twice the rate that Europe has. And one of the most important reasons for that is because it has followed this policy of national energy security.
It's so funny, the idea that this suddenly became a good idea, that you should have national energy security. This is so basic for any nation state where you can. Some of the countries that are most vulnerable, like Japan, they have no natural resources. They have to import everything. That's why the seas are very important. We have wonderful national resources. We've got the North Sea. We've got the ability to frack. We've got oil. We've got all of these natural resources, and we're making a deliberate policy, not just under Labour. The Tories were doing it too, to basically not use them. But we still need those fossil fuels to fuel our energy needs, electricity included. So we import it from abroad. It's the definition of madness.
Yeah, it's not Donald Trump's America which is the outlier on climate and energy. Most countries around the world are doing what he preaches, which is exploiting their oil and gas reserves, while, by the way, also investing in renewables. They're investing in both. Steady upward trend in investment in renewables and fossil fuels, because the world needs energy, growing population, growing wealth in the population, expectations of the world's population. The world needs growing energy, and most countries appreciate that's going to come in the short future, at least from fossil fuels, as much as it is going to come from renewables.
We're going to
it's only Britain which is, stands out on a limb on that and thinks we can do without it.
And apparently do a lot of electricity. At least they went down from 100% of electricity from renewable energy by 2030. Now it's just 95%. Again, equally unachievable. But Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, Energy Security or Not Zero Secretary, he's warned Donald Trump, I love that he's warning Donald Trump, that the rise of net zero is unstoppable, quite in contrast to Donald Trump's drill, baby, drill pushing. He says, I think the transition is unstoppable, not fast enough, but unstoppable. Eventually we will get to clean fuels, but it probably will be, within, the century as opposed to within the decade. That's the reality, isn't it? And yet this government is pushing on relentlessly with its net zero policies, and there's a little bit of tinkering on whether or not you're going to be allowed to, you're going to be banned from having a new gas boiler, or whether you're going to have this particular mandate on electric vehicles or this particular target. But fundamentally, government policy, energy policy and economic policy is all based on net zero targets. And it is not possible to boost the economy, to boost growth, if you've got those targets in place, is it?
Do you know how much wind energy we're generating at the moment? As we speak, 0.7% of our energy is coming from wind turbines.
Come on, let's have a round of applause for that. Well done. Is that of our energy or of our electricity?
Of our electricity, and
which is only 20% of our energy needs.
Yes, that's right. And 2% is coming from solar power.
How?
Now,
I mean, I'm looking
and
out there. How?
4 p.m. the sun's going to come down. Energy requirements are going to go up because it's going to get colder. This is exactly the sort of weather conditions which Ed Miliband's policies just don't seem to take into account.
I'm sorry. At this point, I think if he were here, he would just shout climate denier at you, Ross.
Oh, we probably would, and that's what people bark at you when they haven't got any proper argument to counter what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, do you know what? Ed Miliband's latest, so for months and months, I tried to get out of his department what was its plan for situations like today when there's hardly any wind or any solar energy.
Most of the winter.
Now we do have some kind of answer. You know what Ed Miliband wants to do? He wants to keep all our gas power stations sort of virtually mothballed in reserve so he can turn them on a day like today. Well, the cost of that is going to be incredible because we're going to have to pay to maintain all these gas power plants so we can turn them on days like today. But then we're also going to have to pay to compensate those wind and solar farm owners when they are generating too much power to feed into the grid, so that the whole system is incredibly expensive
and utterly mad. And again, the answer we keep being told is batteries, and there is absolutely no chance that we're going to be able to spend trillions, which is what it would cost, on the battery storage that would be necessary for us to be reliant just for the 20% of our energy that is electricity.
Yeah, just go back to those statistics. Do you know how much power is being provided by battery installations at the moment?
How much?
Absolute zilch. It doesn't even show up.
Oh, you and your
we've
facts,
got
Ross.
some of these battery installations, but they're so expensive that they never get used. And what we're doing instead is we are importing energy from the near continent, from France, Belgium, Netherlands, and so on. 12% of our energy in the past day has come from overseas, and that has been the situation for the past year. We're just sucking in more and more energy, electricity through these subsea connectors. They were supposed to work in both directions. We were supposed to export electricity as much as we were going to import it, and Boris Johnson told us we were going to be the Saudi Arabia of wind.
No.
And what's happening is these interconnectors, we're just merely importing electricity through them now, and with obvious effects on our balance of payments.
Well, yeah, I mean, a small point, and indeed on our security as a nation, because again, if you haven't got energy and you haven't got cheap affordable energy, you can't defend yourself. This is really basic stuff, isn't it? One of the key things that Donald Trump's also announced in the last 24 hours is this massive investment in AI. Everyone is, AI is the future, and we're talking about huge sums of money. But the key thing is $500 billion. The key thing that AI uses is extraordinary amounts of electricity. Now, we've had a lot of talk in this country about how Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, and she's off in Davos, and we'll come to that in a moment, about how want to entice the tech entrepreneurs to this country, and we develop and innovate an awful lot of fantastic tech in this country, and then it all ships off to America, partly because of course our energy costs are so high, worse for manufacturers than they are for domestic use. But is there any possibility that we're going to be able to develop a big AI industry and be at the forefront of this major tech revolution if we've got energy costs that are 5 times that of America?
No.
That's the short answer.
Basically, you look at, take West London, for example. I mean, we've had a lot of data centres built there in the last few years, and the government wants more to be built there, and hugely energy-hungry things. And as a result, housing developers have been told, well, you can't build any new houses in that area for another 10 years till 2035 because the grid connection is not strong enough. There's not enough electricity can be shipped in there because it's being taken up by all these data centers. Well, how you add a load of AI, data centers on top of that, well,
it's just not going to happen. I mean, it's just pie in the sky.
Realise its dream.
I mean, talking about
AI superpower.
Indeed, I mean, talking about pie in the sky. Getting planes in the sky much easier if you've got a load of airports and a load of runways. I'm very surprised by this, but Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, over in Davos, and she's got a big speech next week, we're told, but she's going to be talking about, boosting our number of runways. So at Gatwick and at Luton and at Heathrow, a third runway at Heathrow. My God, I think that since the day I became a political journalist, that has been a big battle. But what's fascinating is you've got, half the cabinet who voted against a third runway at Heathrow, including, I think, one Keir Starmer when he was in opposition, are now apparently going to be asked to sort of back basically powers to override any legal objections, of which there will be many, including from Sadiq Khan, the London Labour mayor, to more runways around in all the major London airports. Do you think that those moves would be good economically? And do you think that the concerns about the impact on climate change, which inevitably will be brought up, and our non-net zero targets will mean they never happen?
No, it's an interesting schism, isn't it, in the Labour Party? It's completely ripped down the middle on this now, because some new airport capacity is totally at odds with, the government's net zero policy, and because, we can't fuel our planes on anything else other than fossil fuels at the moment. I mean, Richard Branson did fly a jet across the Atlantic a couple of years ago, powered by used vegetable oil, but there are not enough chip shops in the world to feed all our planes. We do need more runways, we do need more air capacity, but I've never thought Heathrow is the right place to put another runway. I mean, years ago, the Heathrow should have been relocated to the Thames estuary years ago. You know what we should do there? We should build a tidal barrier which prevents, flooding in London. Also use it as a tidal power station, reliable green energy, and on land behind it, we would reclaim some land behind it and build an airport there. And also we could have a road across the barrage, so we could have a 4-in-1 infrastructure project there.
Far too sensible. Anyway, even if the government did try and do that, they'd manage to mess it up. They build it in the wrong place. It would cost 10 times as much, and it wouldn't be built until, probably to 100 years' time. And that's what we do in this country. Look, in your book, Far From Utopia, How Europe is Failing and Britain Could Do Better, I mean, it's amazing how much this government want to desperately tie us back in with Europe. And we've, Ed Davey this morning, Lib Dem leader, has been going on about going into the customs union again. We know we know that the front bench of the Labour Party absolutely want to do that. And let's face it, quite a lot of Tories too. But what I find fascinating, and I'd love to hear your reaction to this, is why are so many British politicians still fixated with Europe? When Europe's economies are like dominoes failing one by one, and particularly the powerhouse economy that drives the whole of the EU, which is Germany. Why are they so fixated with that and not the booming economies across the Atlantic and in Asia?
It is bizarre, isn't it? I mean, you listen to the Ramonas, they think that sort of Britain has sort of left this terribly economically successful and liberal-minded
booming
continent of Europe. And to make that point, they sort of rely on us not actually looking too much at what's going on across the Channel. Germany's just about to enter its third year of recession. France is up to its eyeballs in debt, just like we are. Yes, our economy is flatlining, but that is true across Europe. And Italy and Spain in the last couple of years have done a little bit better than most, but that comes on top of years of decline. And as I said earlier, the basic backstory to this is that for the whole of this century, European economies have been grown about half the rate that US economy has grown, and that's no accident. Yeah. It's because of the way Europe approaches things. For our industrial policy, the EU has always looked upon sort of existing industries as sort of heritage things. Yeah. They've got to be preserved, and anything new, internet and social media and everything, that's a threat, and it has to be suppressed through regulation. And I mean, that's a fundamental background to why Europe cannot grow. Think of the world's 100 biggest companies now. It's only about 17, I think, are European.
Wow, that's fascinating.
The Europe's makes it only 15th in the list of the biggest countries.
And yet we have some of the world's biggest economies. It's a massive trading bloc, but it just sort of we're sort of anti-innovation. It's absolutely fascinating. I could talk to you all day. Ross Clark, a journalist and author, his new book, Far From Utopia: How Europe is Failing and Britain Could Do Better. He's terribly afflicted by this terrible need to use facts to make his argument, which makes it terribly unpopular. But this is a brilliant new book out this week by Ross Clark. Thank you, Ross.